Hello everyone, welcome to the third of our Putting into Practice Land Rights and Responsibilities webinars. Today we're going to be focusing on diversification of ownership and tenure and negotiating transfer of land to communities. I'll just give people a bit more time to join. We're up to 46, we have got 100 registered. Okay, so my name is Kirsty Tate. I'm a good practice advisor with the Scottish Land Commission. I'll just bring in my colleagues Gemma and Helen, who will introduce themselves to you.
Hello, I'm Gemma. I'm the Good Practice Manager at the Land Commission.
Hello, I'm Helen. I'm also a Good Practice Advisor at the Scottish Land Commission. I'm going to be in the background today hosting the webinar and also keeping an eye on your questions as they come through, so you'll be seeing me popping up again later.
So firstly, we'll just go through a few housekeeping points. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view and share on our YouTube channel. As Helen mentioned, we have the question and answer function. Thank you to all of you who posed questions when you registered for this webinar. Please also use the question and answer function through the webinar to ask questions. We'll attempt to answer as many of these as possible in the times allocated, but we'll also be collecting all the questions posed and we'll write up answers to share with you in a report after this webinar series. Your feedback is extremely important to us. A short feedback form will be emailed to you after this webinar, so please do take the 2-3 minutes just to complete it and give us your feedback and any suggestions, questions you have. Finally, if you enjoy a bit of social media and want to tweet, please do use our really short hashtag land rights and responsibilities. I'll get Helen just to post it up on our chat so you can copy and paste. Okay, so we're going to do a quick poll. I'm just going to hand over Helen to introduce this to you.
Okay, thanks, Kirsty. I'm just about to launch a poll, which you should all start to see on your screens now, hopefully. And we'd be grateful if you could just take a couple of minutes to answer 2 quick questions: where you're from and your main reason why you're attending this webinar. And I'm going to give that a minute or so to give you all a chance just to pop your answers in, and then we will share that poll and see where everybody's from. Okay, we're up to just over 80% of you voted, so I think nearly everybody's there. Okay, just 2 or 3 more just coming in. Okay, thank you. I think that's just about all of you who have popped your answers in, so thank you very much for that. So I will share that now, so you can see where you're from, and I'm delighted to see we have a really good spread of geographic interests from all regions of Scotland are represented here this afternoon. Delighted to see that. We're seeing an increasing diversity in where people are from, and just emphasising that our work on at the Scottish Land Commission and around land reform is about urban and rural issues and cover all aspects of land use across all areas of Scotland, so great to see that. Your reasons for attending the webinar, again, a mixture. We're seeing with these webinars quite a lot of interest from professionals, people who advise and support either landowners or communities, but also people who are generally interested in land reform and who want to know more. And again, we've got a reasonable spread there this afternoon, which is great, because there will be something of relevance to you, whatever your interests are. because of the range of interests that we get at these webinars, some of the information will be completely new to some of you. Others of you will be a lot more familiar with it. We will try and cover as broad a spread of information as we can. We will also mention some places where you can get more information for those of you who are wanting to dig a bit deeper than we've got time to cover this afternoon, but I'm sure there'll be plenty for you all to find of interest. So I'm going to hand back to Kirsty now, who will take us through the programme for the rest of this afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen. So I'll just quickly go through the programme for today. We're going to begin with an introduction to the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement and Good Practice Programme. I know quite a few of you have been following the series and have attended our last two, so there will be a bit of repetition here. So just maybe you want to put on mute. We will come back in at 2:15 and actually give an overview of the focus of this webinar, the two protocols, diversification of ownership and tenure, and negotiating transfer of land to communities. Each of these will be accompanied by a 10-minute question and answer session. We'll move on to just giving you an introduction to two opportunities we offer, our Land Rights and Responsibility Self-Assessment pilot programme and our in-house online training workshop offer, and we'll finish with the date for the next webinar. So I'm going to hand over now to Gemma, who's going to give you an introduction to the Land Rights Responsibility Statement and our work here at the Scottish Land Commission.
Hi there. So as Kirsty said, I'm going to talk you through, first of all, the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement and then a bit about the Good Practice Programme. So the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement was published by the Scottish Government, and it's first of its kind anywhere in the world. The decisions we make about land ownership and use and management are central to some of the key challenges we face as a society, including social and economic inequality, the climate emergency, and as we've all seen play out over the last few months, the impact the pandemic's had and our post-pandemic recovery and renewal. So this is about realising the rights of everyone in relation to land. It's not just property rights, but responsibilities as well that come for all of us with those land rights. So this is about owning, managing and using land in a fair and just way that benefits everyone in Scotland. It's about realising and applying these rights in a way that reduces inequality, brings mutual benefits to landowners, land managers and to communities. So the statement's vision and 6 supporting principles underpin the work we do in the Good Practice team and cut across the work we do in the Commission. And they provide a policy context in supporting change and good practice in the way our land is owned and used. So I think, as Helen's already mentioned, land rights and responsibilities apply in urban and in rural Scotland. And the key changes that are proposed through the principles, or the key principles of the statement, are that the overall framework of land rights responsibilities should promote, fulfil and respect relevant human rights, contributing to public interest and well-being and balancing public and private interests. That there should be greater diversity in ownership and tenure of land, including more community ownership. That we should see high standards of stewardship, looking after Scotland's land for future generations, that there should be high standards and transparency of land ownership and use, and that there should be better community engagement in decisions about land. So I'll move on now and tell you a bit more about our Good Practice programme. So we've been given a key role to play in development and realisation of the statement's principles, and a key part of that is our Good Practice programme, which has been designed to provide a visible and coordinated approach, encouraging and enabling those with an interest in land to recognise and fulfil their rights and responsibilities in practical ways. So we work with all owners of land, including individuals, companies and trusts, public owners, NGOs, charities and community owners, and we also work with tenants of land. So the work we've put together, you can see on the slide there, we work with the Good Practice Advisory Group. This is a group of key stakeholders. We come together a couple of times a year and have lots of contact in between, and they've been really key in providing feedback and support and helping us to develop the protocols that we're talking to you about today. So the advisory group is made up of members from Community Land Scotland, the Development Trust Association for Scotland, National Farmers Union Scotland, Scottish Land and Estates, and the Scottish Property Federation. And we also have Scottish Environment Link, who have joined us more recently. We also engage with other organisations where they've got particular experience and expertise, and if you joined us last week when we spoke about trusts and charities, that Oscar were really key in some of the work we developed around that. So we've also got the Land Rights and Responsibility Self-Assessments, which you will hear a little bit more about later on. And we're working on a training and development programme, which includes the webinars that we're doing today, and also some more in-depth workshops. So if there are particular issues that you hear about today and you're thinking that your organisation would like to learn a bit more about them, you might want a training session or to build it into an existing event that you're holding, then please do get in touch with us after the webinar. We're more than happy to speak to you about that. Okay, so taking us on to the protocols themselves. So the protocol set out what good practice looks like and tries to give clear practical expectations for interested parties. They aim to provide clarity of guidance and a clear approach for landowners, managers and communities to enhance accountability by providing a feedback mechanism and to enhance understanding of the issues that other parties face. So they are voluntary protocols, however they do offer a way to provide a support resolution and hold behaviour to account. It's from our part, we will provide advice on implementing these. We will investigate issues if people raise them with us, and they help to build our understanding of issues for perhaps future protocols or for policy recommendations that we might make going forward. So it's a really useful way for us to collect evidence about what we do. And as I've said, it's something that we develop with input from stakeholders. So hopefully they are something that's really useful. You know, we've got lots of membership organisations who have helped us refine what we're asking for in these protocols and make sure that they are a reasonable level of expectation and that they are relevant to the way that people act in day-to-day life. So on the next slide, I'll just take you through the series that we have so far. So if you've been joining us over the last few weeks, you'll be very familiar with these. Our first protocol was published in January last year, and that was on community engagement and decisions relating to land. And that was followed along this year with our protocol on transparency of ownership and land use decision making. Those two protocols really are the bedrock of the series of protocols, and they kind of underpin all of the others. So it will be no surprise to you here there are overlapping areas in all of these things, but those two in particular really do provide the foundation for it. Last week we spoke about land ownership by charities and by private trusts, very specific audience for those two. And then this week we are speaking about diversification of ownership and tenure and about negotiating transfer of land communities. And our final protocol on good stewardship of land will be published tomorrow, so do keep an eye out for that one. And our webinar on that is following on really closely. That will be next Tuesday, so if you're interested in good stewardship, you can join us next Tuesday to hear a bit more about that. So I believe I'm passing you back to Kirsty now to hear a bit more about diversification of ownership and tenure.
Thank you, Gemma. So our first protocol that we're looking into in depth today, as Gemma said, is diversification of ownership and tenure. So firstly, I'd like to give some context to this protocol and the reasoning behind this focus. As we all know, Scotland has an unusually concentrated pattern of land ownership in an international context. As part of the Commission's work to support Scottish Ministers' ambitions for a fairer and more dynamic framework for the ownership and use of Scotland's land, we have investigated the issues associated with scale and concentration of land ownership. Our research revealed that the concentration of social, economic and decision-making power does actually significantly impact communities across rural Scotland. A common method of addressing monopolies is diversification, and we have made initial recommendations to the Scottish Government to address the adverse effects identified. However, we realise that this is not wholly a rural issue, but that the diversification of the ownership, management and use of all land can have benefits for Scotland. And this has been recognised in Principle 2 of the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement, which states there should be a more diverse pattern of land ownership and tenure, with more opportunities for citizens to own, lease and have access to land. So why is this important? You'll see the quote here: a wide and diverse availability of land and buildings allows businesses, organisations, individuals and communities to pursue projects of all scale and purposes. Offering more people the opportunity to own and lease land can also contribute to a fairer Scotland and enables more people to enjoy land and the rights and responsibilities that go with that. We also believe that diversifying ownership and tenure can have benefits for owners of land too. This can contribute to a more diversified asset base. It can generate funds to reinvest elsewhere. It can improve public profile and your relationship with the community, but it can also provide opportunities for innovation and collaboration which might not exist currently. So let's move on to look at the expectations in more detail. As I said, this protocol aims to encourage landowners to support the diversification of land ownership. There's a few terms I think I'll just need to go through that we mention through the protocol. So when we talk about community, the focus of this protocol is on those who live locally and may wish to own, lease or use land in the local area. This rather than the focus being on communities of interest. We also refer to collaborative arrangements through the protocol, and by which we mean any arrangement between two or more parties that facilitates the sharing and/or use of resources. Collaborative working can include tenancies, short-term leases, partnership arrangements, management agreements, and informal arrangements. The specific expectations in this protocol are aimed at owners of land, urban and rural. Again, as Gemma mentioned, this includes individuals, companies and trusts, public owners, NGOs, charities and community owners. So the protocol starts by inviting landowners to undertake regular reviews of their holdings, to assess business needs and consider what opportunities there might be to work with others to make more productive use of land or buildings to meet the local area's needs and aspirations. Under this, areas which should be considered are they being maintained and used productively in a way that supports sustainable development? Are they being managed in a way that contributes to governance and management objectives? And finally, are there opportunities to work with others to make more productive use of the land and buildings? Moving on to the consideration of wider benefits. When making decisions about the sale or lease of land, we recommend that landowners consider the long-term benefits this could have. These benefits can be to the economy, society, or environment, and may be long-term benefits that could outweigh the value of short-term gains. The next expectation outlines what is expected when a community organisation makes a proactive request for a sale or lease of property. These should be considered when they are reasonably made, and landowners should be open and transparent in their decision-making processes and provide clear reasons for the decisions where this is possible. Diversifying ownership is not always feasible, and where this is the case, landowners should consider what the other options are for leasing, partnership working, or other collaborative working arrangements. This is not just about diversity of ownership. Significant benefits can be achieved by diversity of management and use too. When considering the transfer or lease of land, landowners should consider the different ways they could do this. Those with existing pre-exemption rights should be approached first. Landowners should then consider offering sitting tenants a right of refusal. And if the parties above do not wish to purchase, you can then consider what opportunities there are to work with the community to meet identified aspirations and needs. An example of this process is the ongoing Langland Moor sale, and we've written this up, and this can be viewed in our good practice section on our website. The next expectation is about encouraging transparency. If possible, landowners should make the local community aware of any off-market or private sales and any approaches by developers. Through our community engagement, we recognise that selling land on any scale is a land use decision which can have a significant impact on the community, depending on the local context. The earlier in this decision-making process community engagement begins, the more opportunity there is to establish a mutually beneficial approach, clear lines of communication, and help prevent misunderstandings arising in the future. Finally, the final expectation in this protocol is looking at title conditions and clawback arrangements. These are sometimes used when land is transferred, particularly if the land is sold at a discount. Landowners should ensure that title conditions and clawback arrangements are appropriate and proportionate, and should avoid those that will have an adverse impact on the viability or sustainability of businesses, community projects, or other activities on the land. So that's a very brief overview of the diversification protocol. I'm going to hand over to Helen now, who's going to manage the question and answer session, and we'll hear a bit more from you.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. We haven't yet got any live questions in, but when people were registering for this session, we did invite people to ask us questions in advance as well. So I do have a few to start you both off. And Kirsty, I'm actually going to come back to you again, because one of the questions we got asked before when people were registering was about a point you touched on a few minutes ago there about assessing land and buildings, and I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about how a landowner might go about that process and what sorts of things they should take into consideration.
Okay, so we've put out more detail on this in our frequently asked questions, and I'll just go through and give an overview of what we suggest and what we suggest you might consider. So when we talk about sustainable development, we take the description that it is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So really you should consider why the land is held and what the aim of managing it is, thinking about economic, social, cultural and environmental purposes. So examples of questions you might ask yourself in these self-assessments and self-reviews is, are the land and buildings in good condition and being maintained for the long term? If so, will this continue being the case? Do I have a conscious plan of how my land and buildings are used? And does the way that my land and buildings are used and managed help me fulfill my objectives? Finally, is ownership and management of land and buildings key to meeting my aims? And are they being used in the best way they could be? And if not, just maybe consider, are there opportunities to sell or lease or find alternative ways to manage the land through maybe perhaps working in partnership? And also being aware, I think if you look back into our community engagement protocol, this is very much being aware of the local community's needs and aspirations. And within this, are there local needs and aspirations that you've identified or the community has identified that land and buildings could be better meeting? And can you create more opportunities for the community through the use, management, sale of your land and buildings? So there are just a few questions to ask. It will be very different in different circumstances, but again, we're here to support, to answer any questions. So do get in touch if you're interested in a self-review, self-assessment, and we can offer support guidance through this.
Thanks for that, Kirsty. And I think you mentioned there that that information is included in the frequently asked questions resource, which is included with this protocol on the good practice section of our website. So for those of you who didn't scribble all that down quickly enough, you'll be able to find some more information about it there. Still waiting for people to ask questions this afternoon. This is unusual for us. We usually get lots of questions coming in as we're talking. Here we go, coming up. I'll have a look at one from Daniel in just a second. But in the meantime, Gemma, I'm going to come back to you because we also had another question that came in when people were registering. We had a couple of community organisations asking, they were interested in either developing derelict sites within town boundaries or working in rural areas, working with farmers and landowners to develop new projects to assist the community. Could you explain to folk a little bit more about how they would go about this?
Sure, yeah. I think in the situation where you've got a community who want to develop sites or are looking to work with landowners, I think it's important the first step is to identify who owns the sites so that you know who to speak to. You know, it could be that it's somebody you've got an existing relationship with. It could be somebody completely new, an organisation maybe that you've never had contact with before. So I think it's really important to make that initial approach and to have conversations with people, to let them know that you're interested. And also it's important to know that the projects that you're taking forward meet the needs and the priorities of your community. So that could be something you do through your own engagement exercises, through ongoing communication with the community. So if the intention was for the community to take ownership of a site, you would need to identify if there's an existing group that's appropriate to take it forward, or whether a new appropriately constituted group would need to be set up to take that on. So it is something, if you are a community and you're looking to take on sites, whether they're derelict or whether it's you know, other sites in your community, Highlands and Isles Enterprise have got a really good resource to help you with that, called 10 Steps to Community Ownership. So that is a really useful place to start, and that takes you through step by step what you should consider. If the preferred option was to work with others in a collaborative way through partnership working, or taking something on, it would be really helpful to carry out a stakeholder mapping exercise to understand who the parties are who could be involved and how you might involve them, and then to make those approaches. So again, it's a lot about knowing who to speak to, making those connections and building relationships with them. And again, if you're having a look online, you might have something like the Stalled Spaces project. They've got some really useful examples of projects that have been taken on land that wasn't being used. And going specifically to the question about the derelict sites that communities want to take on, we've done a lot of work on vacant and derelict land in the Commission. We've got a lot of resources on our website and a lot of reports about assessing the consequences of vacant and derelict land and of getting funding to bring sites back into use. And we're also doing work with Development Trust Association Scotland. I believe we've got Carleen Doherty on the webinar today. She won't be able to say hello, but hi Carleen. She will be working with communities, looking at kind of smaller sites and opportunities for communities to take those on.
Thanks, Gemma. I've got a really quick question that's come in. Can you give a quick definition of pre-exemption? We've referred to the term pre-exemption. Can you explain for those that aren't familiar with it what that means?
Sure. Hi Mary. It's preemption, and it might be where there's an existing right, and that could be through a title deed or a previous agreement, where there is land that's going to be sold, and when it's sold there is a particular person or a particular body that has to get essentially the first right of refusal on taking on that land.
Thanks for that, Gemma. Thanks. Kirsty, I'm going to come back to you. Daniel's asked us a question. I'll just read it out for those that can't see it. Given the lack of social cohesion in many areas across the country in both urban and rural contexts, what do we mean by the community? When we talk about community engagement, how can landowners engage with the community, and how are they brought together how are communities brought together to engage with that process? Any thoughts?
Thank you, Daniel. So we cover a lot of this in our first protocol on community engagement and decisions relating to land. So there's a lot of guidance, support tools, etc. there on our section, but this is a question we get asked a lot by landowners and owners of land. How do we identify the community? And I think your point about social cohesion as well is quite a known one as well. So in terms of what we advise, when we talk about engaging with the community, what we're advising is you landowners engage with community organisations, those that are constituted and representative of their community. So they could be, for example, community councils, development trusts, community land trusts, business improvement districts, resident association, tenant association, housing associations. If you don't know about your community and you don't know much about the groups that make up, that are within that community, good sources of information are either your local authorities, but also community councils. We do recognise community councils, there's, you know, that they vary across the country, but they are a very good level of representation and democracy, and that we would encourage engagement with the community councils as they do represent those communities. I think it's mainly about dialogue and relationship building and becoming knowledgeable about the area that you own land in and becoming involved and communicating, really. And we realize that sometimes there's issues and that, community bodies might not work together, but I think it's a process by which everyone's responsible for that, and communities are responsible as much as landowners, and to kind of work together and identify joint needs and aspirations. So it is a process, but we have lots of guidance on how you create engagement plans, guidance on how you engage with communities. So do visit our website, and again, do get in touch if you want to know more.
Thanks, Kirsty. We've a few more questions here. I'm just going to pick up one more just now, and we'll hopefully pick the rest up later on. So I'm just going to come back to one question. Gemma, we've had a question from Jennifer asking, there's been a lot of transfers of ownership of land in the Highlands and Islands over recent years, and she's asking, what's the main difference between the Highlands and Islands and the rest of the country in terms of transferring ownership of land to the community?
Sure. I'll pick that up, and full disclosure, I'm from South Uist, from a community-owned estate. So, I think a lot of it in terms of the Highlands and Islands is a cultural thing. Some of the first community land buyout did take place in the Highlands, and we're now at a point where in the Western Isles a significant proportion of the community live on community-owned land. So I think there's a general acceptance there of community ownership as a concept, and it's something that's it's pretty much considered normal, really, in the Highlands and Islands. In terms of land reform and the way things have moved, with the 2016 Act, there were some changes brought in, and the Scottish Land Fund expanded to urban areas, and the community right to buy processes were opened up to urban communities. So if you think about that, that's only 4.5 years ago. It's still a much newer concept in an urban setting, and it's I think it's important to note as well in Highlands and Islands, there has been that support from Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and we're seeing that kind of support being expanded with the establishment of the South of Scotland Enterprise. There will be support for communities in Dumfries and Galloway and in the Scottish borders to take these things forward. And I think with community ownership over the last few years, you can see the changes coming, that it's not just communities in the Highlands and Islands who are taking it on. There have been urban buyouts, and there is a lot of interest in the South of Scotland in particular. So I would say that's the main difference, really. It's kind of the support and cultural elements.
Thanks for that, Gemma, and interesting, just going back to our poll at the beginning to see this is probably our first webinar where most of the participants haven't been from the Highlands and Islands, and actually most of you here are from Central Belt area and more urban areas, so I think we're definitely a shift there. That's all we've got time for just now in this slot, but we will be coming back to more questions and answers later, so do please keep them coming in and we will pick up as many as we can as we go through. But now I'm going to hand back to Gemma to take us through the next protocol, please. Thanks.
Sure. So I'm going to talk to you about negotiating transfer of land to communities. So we've just had a bit of a discussion there about community ownership, but the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement sets out in Principle 3 that more communities should have the opportunity to own, lease and use buildings and land which can contribute to their community wellbeing and future development. So it's something that is clearly comes across in the statement that having control over land as a resource can help contribute to increased community resilience, and it enables and empowers communities to tackle challenges in the areas where they live. You know, the ownership and lease of land and buildings can empower communities by strengthening local people's voices in the decisions about resources and services that matter to them. So I will take you through now the expectations that we've set out, and some of these will be familiar. There is some crossover here with the diversification protocol. So our first expectation is we recommend that a community group is formally constituted or is working towards that before formal negotiations begin. Now we totally appreciate it's not always appropriate. It could be that it's a very new group, a very new kind of thing for the community, and they've set up a working group and they might have a constitution for that working group, but they could be working towards identifying the best form of governance and the best structure for them, which is absolutely appropriate for them to take a bit of time to think about that and identify the best way to take things forward. So that's why that's a recommendation there. We say in the protocol that community groups should share some information about their aspirations with a landowner or agent if they're making a proactive approach to a landowner in particular. It is helpful if they can let them know what they're doing, and we recommend that if they're in a position to share further details, then they do so. And then on to the next set of expectations. We're in line with the diversification protocol. We suggest that landowners consider the wider benefits, economic, cultural and social, and that they take into account that there can be longer term benefits that, you know, if considered over time, might outweigh any short term gains. So that's something that it's helpful to take into account when making a decision. We say that community landowners should consider requests from community organisations and should share reasons for their decisions. And again, this ties in with our transparency protocol, with just being open and upfront about things. You know, there could be a valid reason why you're not in a position to proceed with a sale to a community or to another organisation, and it's really helpful if you can just be open about that and give reasons for that. Again, in line with the diversification protocol, if there are off-market sales, private sales or developer approaches, it's helpful to make the local community aware. I think openness and communication and relationship building helps to really tackle some of the misconceptions that arise. It helps to build much better relationships and can garner support for some of the work you're doing. If you're open about these things, if communities feel like things aren't being hidden from them or done secretly. And again, with title conditions and clawback arrangements, these should be appropriate and proportionate. And we've actually been doing some work with the Development Trust Association for Scotland, who are they're working up a really useful guide on risk management for local authorities, and that is specific to asset transfer rather than a negotiated sale. But there's a really, they've done some really interesting work on looking at title conditions and clawback arrangements and some of the impacts those can have. And there are some completely valid ones we do set out in our FAQs, that it could be that it's something like a rural housing burden, or it's a condition in there that retained access for someone who's selling the land, and those kind of things are absolutely valid. But we have unfortunately seen some examples of where sellers have tried to put on conditions that would really hamper development and would prevent a community or another body from carrying out their plans, from taking forward a viable project. So we would want to avoid those in any case. And then on the valuation aspect, we suggest that consideration is given of the options for valuation, including the potential for a joint valuation between a landowner and a community. And we suggest that consideration is given to whether it's appropriate to split the costs between the two parties. That kind of process where you would, a landowner and a community would work together and jointly instruct a valuation. Following on from that, we recommend that anyone going through these, anyone take forward a negotiated sale, have a look at the Community Land Scotland and Scottish Land and Estate Protocol for negotiated sales. That's available on their websites, and there's some guidance, quite a lot of information in there for everyone to follow. And for public landowners, that they either follow the asset transfer procedures, but that they can also follow a negotiated sales procedure. Transfers don't have to be done through asset transfer. And that takes us on, I think, to our supporting resource. So along with the protocol, we've developed a route map for landowners, and this goes along with the two protocols, so for diversification and for negotiating transfer of land to communities. And it's a kind of step-by-step guide to help you take you through the process. There's some signposting to FAQs and some additional resources on our website, and it just takes you through the steps you take and the things you might want to consider if you're following a process where you're disposing of land. We have also, as we've already mentioned, got a set of frequently asked questions on our website, and we developed those with stakeholders as we were developing the protocols, picking up on some of the common questions that were coming up. And we've also got a couple of useful case studies on our website, and I know it's always really helpful to see practical examples and to see where these kind of situations have played out in real life, so do pop onto our website and have a look at those.
Gemma, thank you very much for taking us through that. A lot of information for people to digest there. I'm going to come back to some of the questions, some that we've been sent in advance, and a couple of live ones that we want to pick up from a few minutes ago. Kirsty, I'm going to come to you first, please, and I'm going to ask you two questions at once, because we had two questions sent in that were to do, they were very different but related, because they're to do with options for community ownership of land in particular circumstance. One is whether communities can seek to buy land from a community landowner, from a larger community landowner, and the second one is whether community organisations can bring MOD in land into community ownership. Could you give us some thoughts on those circumstances, please?
Sure. So I suppose the last point, can community organisations in Scotland bring MOD land into community ownership? And yes, of course, community organisations can, and there's some really good examples already out there. One is Comrie Development Trust in Perthshire bought Culty-Bragan, which was an ex-prisoner of war camp in 2007. There's some fantastic stuff going on there, really a real pioneer of community ownership in Comrie, so do have a look at that. And in Gallenhead on the west coast of Lewis, the community bought a former MOD radar station which overlooked the village. Both communities had to go through the community right to buy process to acquire these sites, so it would be fantastic to see the Ministry of Defence as a landowner start to work with this protocol, and maybe we can encourage more negotiated sales between MOD and communities rather than using the right to buy processes. And the other question was about can a township and a community land buyout seek to buy themselves out. So again, yes, a community can seek to buy land from a community landowner, and there are some examples of this, communities who have purchased assets from a community organisation. But we're not aware of any examples of townships seeking a buyout from a community landowner. I think to give advice, the township would need to be clear about the rationale for this buyout, of what the benefits would be for that smaller community and whether it be financially viable. It might also be quite tricky in these circumstances for the township to demonstrate sufficient additional benefits to funders. But again, as a community organisation, you have a wealth of support and guidance out there through Community Land Scotland and Development Trust Association Scotland. So do use those two organisations when you're thinking about community ownership and land and assets. They're there. There's a huge amount of resources, support given. So do get in touch with them. But thank you for those questions. Yeah, quite interesting scenarios.
I know there's always a different scenario that we've not quite thought of before, so thank you for that, Kirsty. Gemma, I have a question from Francis about just asking for a bit of clarification about a point you made earlier about a community identifying the owner of land or building in order to be able to approach them, to make the first step in that negotiated sale transfer. And Francis is asking, is there a particular department in a local authority that stakeholders should approach, or is it a Scottish Government department they should approach in the first instance, or is it somebody else? Could you give us a bit of advice there?
I would say the first point of call probably is somebody else. The Registers of Scotland are responsible for the land register in Scotland, and they do have an online site. It's called ScotList, Scotland's Land Information Service, and that is an online searchable register of titles. If you want to purchase a title and get a bit more information, there is a cost associated with that, and if it's something that's not on the land register but is on the older register of Scenes, there's I think a higher cost for that, but registers is a good place to start. It could be that asking in your community is a good way to do it. But actually, it's interesting that you asked this, as we do quite often get questions about how you identify who owns land. So we have developed an information map. We've actually developed two information maps. One of them is for landowners and will help them to identify who to contact in their community, or where they might find out about community needs and priorities, and get in touch with them. And the other one is for communities, and it sets out the different places that you might go to find out information about land, including ownership. So we haven't published those yet, but we are working on publishing them hopefully in the next month or so. So that will pick up on your question in a bit more detail, but my first point of call anyway would be Registers of Scotland.
Oh, sorry, I'm doing that old trick of not unmuting myself before I try and talk to you. Thanks, Gemma, and useful resources there for people to watch out for coming in as well. I'm going to stay with you, Gemma, if I can, and we're coming back to preemption rights again. We've had a question from Felicity asking whether preemption rights might be a threat to community interests in the long term. Might there be a barrier to communities taking on ownership of assets?
I don't think they are a barrier for the long term. They certainly don't have to be. In some circumstances, it can actually be something that benefits communities. It could be that a community has a preemption right on a site, and it almost is the way that the community right to buy Part 2 gives the community a first right of refusal. So in a situation where a landowner wanted to sell a piece of land and a community had a Part 2 registration over that land, they would have that preemption right and they would be the first party that would be approached. So I certainly don't think it is something that would have to be a threat to community interests.
Thank you. And another quite technical question that's come in, a couple of questions, one from Graham and one from Mary, that are kind of related. Graham has asked a question: when considering community land acquisition and preparation of business plans, do groups and their advisors consider the possible financial and other effects of different types of land value taxation? And Mary has also asked a question about progress to national policy, progress towards ideas of taxing unproductive land, which we might actually come back to a bit more next week, Mary, when we're talking about stewardship. But Gemma, I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about the financial and taxation effects of community land transfers.
Sure, yeah, to pick up on Mary's point, first of all, on taxation, it is something that our colleagues in policy and research are working on. We are looking at tax and fiscal policy and how that can be used to influence land ownership, use and management. So that is something you will see coming through our work in the next few years. In terms of Graham's question, I think it's kind of important to know when communities are preparing their business plans, when they apply for funding, they will prepare a business plan, and they've got to demonstrate that any acquisition that they're proposing would be financially viable. So, whether that was through grant funding, community shares, social investment, or more traditional loan financing, they would have to make that justification. So, as with any other business planning, they'll take into account their different streams of income, of any costs that they're going to incur in running the assets. And often their business plans will look at different scenarios to examine how robust their plans are, for example, for differing levels of income and expenditure and for any changes that can be seen on the horizon. So that I would say that if there are any known changes, if there is anything coming up that would fit within the lifespan of that business plan, then a community, like any other landowner, would take that into account in their plans. And as with any other type of landowner, communities will generally seek professional advice on these things. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And we've just got time for one more, I think, and I'll come back to Kirsty quickly. That a question that came into us at registration about whether owners who are part of a community themselves, how can they be involved in transfer of land to community ownership? Could you give us a very quick answer on that before we close this part of the session up?
Sure. So as I said earlier, when we talk about communities in this context, we do talk about all the people who live within a geographic area, including residents who own the land. So I do get feedback from landowners who do say we are not apart from the community, we are part of that community, and that is exactly what we want to see. We want to see landowners feeling they are part of that community and belong to that community and feel that sense of responsibility within that community as well. So landowners, yes, could be involved in acquisition projects through membership of local community groups and through participating in engagement activities. That shouldn't bar you from participation and being engaged and being involved in your community. I think it's a very positive thing, and it would be something that we want to see more of, and more landowners of all types feeling that sense of belonging and responsibility, and which would then result in greater knowledge and understanding of that community and what their needs and aspirations are. So yes, they can, and please do. We greatly encourage it. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. Gemma, I think you're quickly wanting to come in.
Yeah, I was actually just going to pick up on Ninian's point in the chat there on productive use and development, and just to say that when we say productive use, that's not necessarily doing something with or developing the land. I think, Ninian points out quite fairly that a lot of communities will be interested in conservation and regenerative uses. And this is an issue that we are going to pick up on in more detail next week when we talk about our stewardship protocol. But it is about balance, and that, managing land for conservation, certainly from my point of view, would be a productive way. It would be a deliberate way of managing land, and that's I think really what we're looking for there. It's a proactive use and the intention. there. So please do, if you're free next week, join us for stewardship, and we can go into that in a bit more detail.
That's great. Thanks, Gemma, for picking that up. We do have 2 or 3 more questions. Unfortunately, we've run out of time on this slot just now, but any questions that we've not managed to cover this afternoon, we will follow up with written Q&As once we publish the report for this webinar. So we won't forget about you if you've not had your question answered today. I'm sorry, we don't always have time to get through everything, but I'm going to have to hand back now to Kirsty to finish off with the final part of our programme for this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that. That was 2 really good sessions. I always enjoy the question and answer session. They're really useful for us. So we always encourage feedback and get in touch and tell us about scenarios and different circumstances. And I think it just increases our knowledge and understanding of what's going on out there in Scotland and what's going on in different areas. So thank you for sharing and thank you for asking those questions. So very quickly, I'm going to go through 2 opportunities that we're offering at the moment. Land rights and responsibilities self-assessments. The rationale for this pilot programme again stems from our investigation into the impact of scale and concentration of rural land ownership, which I mentioned earlier. One of our recommendations is the introduction of statutory reviews to ensure accountability of land holdings in relation to the land rights and responsibility principles. So ministers have agreed with the Commission that we should do further work to develop how such reviews could be taken forward. So to start with this, we've developed this pilot programme and a short voluntary self-assessment framework to help anyone who makes significant decisions about the way land or buildings are used or managed, both rural and urban, and to assess how they contribute to the land rights and responsibilities statement. So we're looking for participants to pilot and test this framework. We think it does give quite a number of opportunities. It gives an opportunity to evaluate your operations and governance, to identify good practice that might be shared with other landowners, which we really put a lot of emphasis on. It would help you identify areas for improvement and also provide us with feedback and influence on how this work is being taken forward. We're already working with a number of landowners across Scotland, but really keen to get as wide a selection as possible. So please do, if you're interested in this, get in touch, use the feedback form to let us know your details or get in touch with us directly to find out more. We're also offering free in-house tailored workshops. These are also be delivered online. Before COVID hit, we ran several of these with land agents across Scotland, and it did make us recognise how beneficial taking time out to actually reflect on what good practice is can be for both the organisations and ourselves. These workshops will be designed with you and will give you an opportunity to discuss specific cases or examples and practical guidance. And we can cover a fuller overview of the Commission's work. We are just we are part of the Scottish Land Commission's work. We do a huge amount more, and we can maybe go into more detail about that in these workshops. We'll cover the whole of the Land Rights and Responsibilities Protocol series, and also maybe delve deeper into any protocol or area of interest that you want to discuss in more depth or detail. So very quickly, the next protocol is booked for next Tuesday the 1st of September, and that is the last in our series, and that will be looking at good stewardship of land. So that'll be a very interesting one. Look out for the protocol being published tomorrow. Again, we have recorded every webinar, so they will be available to listen, and also the reports will be written up, which will contain all the questions that were posed through the session. You can find that on our webpage here. So finally, I'd just like to say a huge thank you for joining myself and my colleagues today. We hope that you find this webinar informative and useful. Again, your feedback is really important. Please do take a couple of minutes to fill in our feedback form. And please also get in contact if you're interested in any of the opportunities or you require more information or just want to talk through something that you're working through. Our contact details are here, and you can also find out more on our website. So it's been an absolute pleasure presenting today, and good luck to all of you on your land rights and responsibility journeys, and we'll hopefully see some of you next week. Okay, so I'll just leave my colleagues to say bye as well.
Thank you for joining us today, and as Kirsty says, if you've got anything at all, please do get in touch. We're always more than happy to talk about these things, and we will pick up on the additional questions that have come in. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon, and please remember to fill in your feedback forms. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.